23 years ago, a poor woman risked everything to save a dying stranger who stumbled into her cottage covered in blood. He made her a sacred promise, looked into her eyes with desperate gratitude, and swore she would never be forgotten. Then he disappeared into the night and became a king. She lost everything: her home, her children, her dignity, while he lived in golden halls, completely erasing her from his memory, as if she had never existed at all. Every attempt to reach him ended in humiliation. Every plea for help met with guards' laughter and closed doors. Until the night she walked into his royal celebration wearing something impossible, something sacred, something that should have been locked away forever: the dead queen's coronation mantle. But this was not an act of revenge. It was an act of desperate truth, because hidden in the silk lining of that magnificent mantle was evidence that would shatter everything the king believed about his own life. The late queen had discovered a devastating secret before her sudden, suspicious death, a secret about the king's past, about the promise he made and forgot, about the advisors who had been controlling him for decades. And now, standing before the entire court in stolen royal crimson, this beggar woman was about to speak a single word that would either destroy her completely or force a king to remember the man he used to be. The advisors who built the king's carefully constructed world were already moving to silence her. The guards were closing in. Time was running out, and the only weapon she had left was a name, a secret name the king told her that night when he thought he was dying, a name no one else in the kingdom knew. A name that could prove everything or condemn her as a madwoman and a liar. But here is what no one expected. The king's memory was not just forgotten. It was stolen, and the truth about why would change everything. The king's boot connected with her ribs before his eyes even registered her face. Not hard enough to break bone, but calculated. The kind of dismissive shove a man gives to a stray dog blocking his path. Ilara's body hit the cobblestones with a sound that made the guards wince, but not intervene. They never did. The castle gates loomed above her like iron teeth, and through her blurred vision, she watched King Edmund's crimson cloak disappear into the courtyard without a backward glance. 23 years ago, she had saved his life with those same hands, now scraped raw against the stone. He had looked into her eyes then, gripped her fingers with desperate gratitude, and sworn an oath that still burned in her memory like a brand. Today, he had looked through her as if she were smoke. The rain started as she pulled herself upright, each breath a sharp reminder of the impact. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, something that had been building for 3 years of failed attempts to reach him. The castle guards knew her. Now, they had a nickname for her: the persistent beggar. They laughed about it in the taverns. This pathetic woman who kept returning with her insane story about saving the prince, as if a peasant girl could ever be remembered by a king, as if promises meant anything when spoken to the forgotten. Ilara pressed her palm against the gate, feeling the cold metal beneath her skin, and for a moment she let herself remember the warmth of that night so long ago, the fear in his young eyes, the blood. On her floor, the weight of his hand in hers as he swore he would never forget. But he had forgotten. Completely, utterly, as if she had never existed at all. The rain plastered her thin shawl against her shoulders, and Ilara forced herself to walk away from the gates, her bare feet silent on the wet stones. The marketplace was emptying as vendors packed their stalls, shooting her suspicious glances. They knew her too. The madwoman, the liar, the one who claimed impossible things. She had lost her credibility along with everything else. Her home, seized for unpaid taxes after her husband died of fever. Her daughter, taken by the same sickness 3 winters ago. Her son, crushed beneath a nobleman's carriage last spring when he ran into the street chasing a rolling apple. All of it gone, all of it while the king she had saved lived in golden halls, eating from silver plates, completely unaware that the woman who had given him his life was starving in the shadows of his prosperity. Ilara's stomach cramped with hunger as she passed a baker's shop. The smell of fresh bread made her dizzy. She had eaten nothing but scraps for 2 days. The baker's wife saw her looking and quickly pulled the shutters closed. Another door shut. Another reminder that she belonged nowhere, to no one. Her reflection, caught in a puddle, showed a woman who looked 20 years older than her 41 years. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, skin weathered by exposure. Was it any wonder he did not recognize her? She barely recognized herself, the girl who had hidden a bleeding prince in her cottage, who had lied to armed soldiers, who had risked execution to protect a stranger. That girl was dead, buried under years of loss and poverty, and the crushing weight of a promise that meant nothing. She found shelter in the doorway of an abandoned weaver's shop as night fell. The stone was cold against her back, but at least it was dry. Her fingers traced the small leather pouch hidden beneath her. Bodice, the only thing of value she still possessed. Inside was a silver falcon pin, no bigger than her thumb, with rubies for eyes. He had left it with her that night, pressed into her palm as he fled at dawn. "Keep this," he had whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "If you ever need me, show this to anyone at the castle. They will know. I swear it on my life. You will always have my protection." She had shown it. 7 times over 3 years, she had shown it to guards, to servants, to minor officials. Each time they had looked at her with contempt, accused her of theft, threatened her with the dungeons. The last time a guard had tried to take it from her, she had bitten his hand and run, and now she did not dare show it again. But there was someone who had believed her, someone who had listened. Ilara's throat tightened at the memory of Queen Isolde 6 months before her death. The queen had been visiting the cathedral to pray, and Ilara had been begging at the steps. Their eyes had met, and something in Isolde's face had shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. The queen had approached her, had asked her story, had listened with an intensity that made Ilara's voice shake. When Ilara had finished, the queen had gone very still. "Show me the pin," she had whispered. And when Ilara had pulled it from her pouch, the queen's face had gone white as parchment. She had reached out, traced the falcon's wings with trembling fingers, and then looked at Ilara with tears streaming down her face. "He does not remember," she had said, not a question but a statement of terrible truth. "He has become what power makes of men. But I remember for him, and I will make this right." 3 weeks later, the queen was dead. Fever, they said. A sudden illness. Ilara had stood at the edge of the crowd during the funeral procession, watching the king's face, so composed, so distant, so utterly untouched by anything resembling the passionate young man who had once wept in her arms. The queen's elaborate burial shroud had been magnificent, but it was her coronation mantle that had captured everyone's attention, a masterpiece of crimson silk embroidered with gold thread, lined with ermine fur, heavy with jewels. It was displayed for 3 days of mourning before being locked away in the royal treasury, a symbol of her reign, a piece of history. Ilara had stared at it through the cathedral windows and felt nothing but emptiness. What did dead queens and their expensive clothes matter to the living who suffered? But 2 months ago, a letter had arrived, delivered by a hooded figure who vanished before Ilara could ask questions. Inside, in elegant script, "The mantle is yours. She wanted you to have it. There is a way in. The old servant's entrance on the north wall. The 3rd stone from the corner turns. Midnight on the dark moon. Take what she left you. Inside the lining, you will find proof. Make him remember." No signature, no explanation, just instructions. And an impossible claim. Ilara had thought it was cruel mockery, but desperation makes believers of skeptics, and she had nothing left to lose. On the night of the dark moon, she had found the entrance exactly as described. The stone had turned. The passage had been real, and in a small chamber off the treasury, wrapped in plain linen, the queen's coronation mantle had been waiting with a note pinned to the silk. For the one he forgot. Make him see. Now, huddled in the doorway as rain hammered. The streets. Ilara pulled the folded parchment from her pouch, the invitation she had stolen from a drunken merchant's pocket yesterday, an invitation to the king's summer solstice ball 3 days hence. the most exclusive event of the season, and she had the mantle hidden in a farmer's barn outside the city walls, wrapped in oilcloth, waiting. The plan was insane, suicidal. She would be arrested the moment guards recognized the queen's ceremonial garment on a beggar's back. But something in her had broken when the king's boot hit her ribs today. Something had finally snapped after 3 years of being invisible. If he wanted to forget her, fine. But he would remember his wife. He would see that mantle and be forced to confront what it meant that a woman like Alara possessed it. And sewn into the lining, where the queen had promised, was the silver falcon pin, the proof that would destroy his comfortable amnesia. Alara closed her eyes and felt her heart beating against her ribs where the bruise was forming. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for the moment that would either vindicate her suffering or end her life. Either way, Edmund would finally be forced to see her. The girl he had forgotten would make him remember, even if it cost her everything. Again. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat, and Alara's hands shook as she unwrapped the oilcloth for the 3rd time that morning. She needed to see it again, needed to confirm it was real and not some fever dream born of desperation. The crimson silk spilled across the straw like blood, catching the thin sunlight that sliced through the barn's wooden slats. Even covered in dust from her hiding place, the mantle was breathtaking, every gold thread still gleaming, every jewel still catching light like captured stars. Alara's breath caught in her chest. She had held this once before, the night she stole it, but touching it now in daylight made her skin prickle with fear. This was the queen's mantle, the same one thousands had watched being placed on Isolde's shoulders during her coronation, the same one that had been locked in the royal treasury under armed guard, and somehow, impossibly, it was here in her trembling hands. Her fingers found the inner lining, tracing the nearly invisible stitches until she felt the small, hard shape sewn into the fabric. The falcon pin, her proof. But as she pressed against it, her thumb caught on something else. Another irregularity in the lining, closer to the collar. Alara's heart began to hammer. She had not noticed this before. Working carefully, she used her broken thumbnail to pick at the threads, and after several minutes of patient work, a small pocket opened in the silk. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, so thin it was almost translucent. Alara's hands trembled violently as she unfolded it, terrified it might disintegrate at her touch. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, unmistakably the queen's. "If you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have found the courage I prayed you would possess. What I am about to tell you will seem impossible, but every word is truth sworn before God. 3 months ago, I confronted my husband about you." Alara's vision blurred. She had to stop, had to breathe, had to force her racing heart to slow enough that she could continue reading. The queen had confronted Edmund. About her. The words seemed to burn off the page. I showed him the records I had found. Old servant logs from the Eastern Hunting Lodge where he stayed that night 23 years ago. I showed him the dates, the location, everything that proved your story was true. I showed him the description of the falcon pin in the royal inventory, listed as missing since that same month. I laid the evidence before him like pieces of his own broken oath, and I begged him to remember, to try, to search his memories for the girl who had saved him. Alara's throat closed. The queen had tried. Someone had actually tried to make him remember. He looked at me with such confusion, such genuine bewilderment, that I knew something was terribly wrong. This was not the forgetfulness of a busy mind or the callousness of power. This was something else entirely. The barn suddenly felt too small, too airless. Alara pressed her back against the wooden wall, the parchment crackling in her grip. What was the queen saying? What did she mean by something else entirely? Her eyes raced across the elegant script, desperate for answers. I consulted with the royal physician in secret, showing him my husband's symptoms, his inability to recall entire periods of his youth, the way certain questions make him irritable and evasive, the headaches he suffers when pressed to remember things before his coronation. The physician examined old records and discovered something that had been carefully hidden by my husband's former advisors. After the attack, you saved him from... Edmund was struck in the head during his escape. Badly. He nearly died from the injury. For 2 weeks he lay unconscious, and when he woke, portions of his memory were simply gone, erased as if they had never existed. Ilara's hands went numb. The parchment slipped slightly in her grip before she caught it, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. He could not remember. Not because he chose to forget, not because he was cruel or ungrateful, but because his mind physically could not retrieve what had been lost to injury. All these years she had blamed him, hated him, thought him a liar and an oath-breaker. All these years she had carried the poison of his betrayal in her heart, and he genuinely, truly did not know she existed. The revelation should have brought relief, understanding, even compassion. Instead, it felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. Because if he could not remember, then what was the point of any of this? How could she make him see what his mind refused to hold? The advisors hid his condition, the Queen's letter continued, and Ilara could hear the fury in the words even through the delicate handwriting. They feared it would make him seem weak, unfit to rule. They coached him through the gaps in his memory, fed him false stories to fill the holes, and swore everyone who knew to secrecy on pain of death. They built him a history made of lies and half-truths, and he has lived in it ever since, never knowing that pieces of his own life are missing. I confronted them. I threatened to expose them. And now I am writing this letter because I fear what they might do to silence me. Ilara's chest constricted. The Queen's death, sudden fever, 3 weeks after she had learned the truth. If I die unexpectedly, you will know I was right to be afraid. But you will also know this: the pin is not just proof of his promise. Sewn into the falcon's base is a tiny mechanism. Press the left ruby eye twice, then the right once. It will open. Inside is a lock of his hair from that night, which I confirmed through testing. Matches his current hair exactly. There is also a drop of his blood, sealed in wax, and a fragment of the cloth you used to bind his wounds, still marked with the royal crest he wore beneath his disguise. This is evidence even his advisors cannot refute. Scientific proof that he was in your cottage, in your care, on that night. The barn spun around Ilara. She clutched the parchment so hard it crumpled at the edges. The Queen had not just believed her, she had built an irrefutable case. She had gathered evidence that could force the truth into daylight, that could make the advisors confess, that could validate everything Ilara had suffered. But the Queen was dead, and Ilara was alone with secrets that men had killed to keep hidden. Her mind raced. If she revealed this at the ball, if she showed the mantle and opened the pin in front of the entire court, those advisors would have her murdered before the night was out. They would claim she stole the mantle, forged the evidence, that she was a madwoman and a liar. Without the Queen to support her testimony, she was nothing but a beggar, making impossible accusations against the most powerful men in the kingdom. Unless she could make Edmund remember on his own, not through evidence, but through something deeper, something that might bypass the broken pathways in his mind and reach whatever fragments remained. Ilara's eyes dropped to the final lines of the letter, and her blood turned to ice. There is one more thing you must know. The night you saved him, Edmund told you something he has not spoken of since, something his advisors do not know he shared with you. I found it in his old journal from that period, written the day after he returned to the castle. If you can make him remember those words, if you can speak them back to him, it will prove beyond all doubt that you are who you claim to be. No forged evidence could contain this knowledge. The words were, I told her my real name, not Edmund, which is my coronation name chosen by advisors. I told her my birth name, the name my mother called me before she died, the name no one has spoken in 15 years. I told her I was called. The letter ended there, torn. The bottom third of the parchment was simply gone, ripped away, leaving the most crucial information lost. Ilara wanted to scream. She turned the fragment over, searching desperately for any trace of the name, but there was nothing. just ragged edges where someone, or something, had destroyed the final revelation. She sat in the hay, surrounded by the Queen's magnificent mantle, holding proof that was simultaneously everything and nothing. She had evidence, but it would get her killed. She had the promise of a memory that could save her, but the memory itself was torn away. And in 3 days, she would walk into a castle full of people who wanted her silent, wearing the stolen garment of a dead queen, gambling everything on the desperate hope that somewhere in Edmund's damaged mind, a fragment of that night remained. A name. His real name. The one she actually knew, but could not prove she knew without the letter. Alara's laugh was bitter and sharp in the empty barn. The Queen had tried to give her a weapon, but fate had broken it in half. Now she would have to walk into the lion's den armed with nothing but the truth and pray it would be enough. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the lining, then wrapped the mantle in its oilcloth. Once more. Her ribs still ached from where the king's boot had struck her. Soon she would stand before him again. And this time, he would not be able to look away. The bathhouse keeper did not ask questions when Alara traded her last copper coins for access to the washing room, but her eyes lingered on the bruises visible beneath Alara's threadbare sleeve. Hot water was a luxury Alara had not experienced in over a year, and as she sank into the wooden tub, her body trembled with something. Between relief and shame, the water turned gray almost immediately, carrying away layers of street grime and the physical evidence of her poverty. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw and pink, watching years of dirt swirl down the drain. But no amount of washing could cleanse the deeper stains, the ones that lived beneath her skin, in her bones, in the hollow places where hope used to reside. Her reflection in the small, cracked mirror showed a stranger. Cheekbones too sharp, eyes too large in a gaunt face. Hair that had once been thick and chestnut now hung limp and colorless, streaked with premature gray. She had 2 days left. 2 days to transform from beggar to someone who could walk through castle doors without immediate arrest. The bathhouse keeper had agreed to trim her hair for an extra coin Alara did not have, so she had offered her shawl instead, the last piece of clothing she owned beyond the ragged dress on her back. The woman had accepted with something like pity in her eyes, and now Alara sat on a wooden stool while steady hands worked through the tangled mess, cutting away the worst of the damage. "You going somewhere special?" the bathhouse keeper asked, her voice carefully neutral. Alara's reflection met the woman's eyes in the mirror. "A ball." The keeper's hands paused for just a moment. "A ball," she repeated slowly, and Alara could hear the unspoken questions crowding behind those words. What business did a woman who traded her shawl for a haircut have at a ball? But the keeper did not voice her doubts. She simply continued cutting, shaping, revealing the bone structure that poverty had sharpened into something almost striking. When she finished, Alara barely recognized herself. The woman looking back from the mirror had the face of an ascetic, a mystic, someone carved down to essential elements by suffering. "You have strong features," the keeper said quietly, "the kind that look better lean, aristocratic almost." She paused, studying Alara, with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You were not always poor." It was not a question. Alara's throat tightened. "No, once I had a home, a family, a life." The keeper nodded slowly. "And now you are going to take something back." Again, not a question. Alara met her eyes in the mirror and said nothing, but the keeper smiled, a small, fierce expression that held understanding. "Good, take it all back, whatever they owe you." Alara left the bathhouse feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with cold air on newly washed skin. She had been invisible for so long that being seen, truly seen, felt dangerous. The streets looked different now that she was clean, or perhaps she simply noticed things she had stopped seeing years ago. Children playing with wooden swords, a merchant arguing with his wife, a young couple stealing kisses in an alley. All these small, normal moments of life that had continued while hers had stopped. She made her way to the cathedral, slipping in through the side entrance where beggars were tolerated if they remained quiet. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass, painting the stone floor in pools of colored radiance. Ilara knelt in the last pew, her newly clean hair falling forward to hide her face, and tried to pray. But the words would not come. What did you ask God for when you were about to commit an act that was either justice or madness? You look different. The voice came from behind her, and Ilara's heart lurched into her throat. She turned to find a young priest watching her with curious eyes. Father Benedict. She had spoken to him once, months ago, during one of her desperate attempts to reach someone who might listen. He had been kind, but ultimately useless, offering prayers but no practical help. Now he studied her with his head tilted, recognition dawning slowly. The woman who claims the king owes her a debt, he said softly, sliding into the pew beside her. Ilara's instinct was to flee, but something in his expression held her still. You have been washing, he continued, and someone has cut your hair. You are preparing for something. His eyes searched her face. Something dangerous. Ilara's hands clenched in her lap. Why do you care? The question came out harsher than she intended, but Father Benedict did not flinch. Because I listened to your story when you told it, and I believed you were telling the truth. But I also believed there was nothing that could be done about it. Men in power do not answer to the powerless, even when they should. He paused, his young face suddenly looking much older. I have been thinking about that conversation for months, about my own cowardice in accepting that injustice as inevitable. So I ask again, what are you preparing for? The cathedral was empty, except for the two of them. Outside, the city continued its oblivious rhythm. But here, in the colored light and sacred silence, Ilara felt something crack open inside her chest. I am going to make him see me, she whispered, even if it destroys me. Father Benedict was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his robe and pulled out a small vial of oil. This is holy oil, he said, used for anointing, for blessing, for marking something as sacred and set apart. He held it out to her. What you are about to do, whether it succeeds or fails, is an act of witness. You are testifying to a truth that powerful men want buried. That is a holy thing, even if the church will not officially say so. Ilara stared at the vial, her vision blurring. I am not holy. I am angry. I am bitter. I want him to hurt the way I have hurt. The priest's smile was sad. That is also honest. Take the oil. Before you go to face him, anoint yourself. Not because it will protect you, I cannot promise that, but because you deserve to know that someone sees the sacred in what you are doing. Someone bears witness to your witness. Ilara took the vial with shaking hands. The glass was warm, from being held against the priest's chest, and it felt impossibly precious in her palm. If I fail, she said slowly, if they arrest me or worse, will you tell people what I tried to do? Will you make sure my children's names are remembered along with mine? Father Benedict's eyes shone with tears. I will, he promised. I will make sure the truth is spoken, even if only from this pulpit, even if only to those few who still come to hear it. Your names will not be forgotten, not by me. Ilara pressed the vial to her chest, feeling her heart beat against it. Mara and Thomas, she whispered, my daughter and son, they died believing their mother was powerless. I want them to be wrong about that, even if it is too late, even if they will never know. She left the cathedral with the vial hidden in her bodice, next to the stolen invitation and the small leather pouch containing the falcon pin. The weight of these objects, the sacred oil, the forged entry, the proof of a broken promise, felt like an anchor dragging her toward an inevitable confrontation. But for the first time in 3 years, the weight did not feel like drowning. It felt like purpose. She spent the remaining hours before nightfall memorizing the layout of the castle from stories she had gathered over months of careful listening. The ballroom would be on the second floor. The main staircase would be guarded, but there was a servant's stair that might be less watched. Once inside, she would need to reach him. the ballroom before anyone recognized the mantle for what it was. And then she would face Edmund while wearing his dead wife's crown jewel, and she would speak words that would either break through his damaged memory or condemn her to execution as a thief and a madwoman. That night, in the barn, Elara laid out the mantle one final time. She pressed the left ruby eye of the falcon pin twice, then the right once, exactly as the Queen's letter had instructed. The mechanism clicked softly, and the base of the pin opened like a tiny door. Inside, exactly as promised, was a lock of dark hair, a sealed capsule of dried blood, and a scrap of cloth marked with a royal crest. Evidence, proof, truth made tangible. Elara stared at these fragments of the past, pieces of a night that had changed her life forever, preserved by a dead queen who had believed her when no one else would. She closed the pin carefully and held it against her chest. Tomorrow night she would wear the mantle. She would walk into the king's celebration, and she would become visible again, even if visibility meant death. Because Father Benedict was right. This was witness. This was testimony. And some truths were worth dying to speak aloud. She tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to the torn letter, to the name she knew, but could not prove she knew. What had his mother called him before advisors renamed him for political convenience? She remembered it, of course. Remembered the way he had whispered it. In her cottage, his voice raw with pain and fear and strange intimacy. My real name is... But would he remember telling her? Would that fragment have survived whatever damage had stolen so much else? Elara pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. Everything depended on a memory that might not exist anymore, evidence that would get her killed if she revealed it, and the desperate hope that somewhere beneath years of lies and injury and power, the boy who had made her a promise still existed. Tomorrow she would find out if hope was enough, or if she had been a fool all along. The weight of the mantle on Elara's shoulders felt like wearing another person's skin. She had put it on in the darkness of the barn, her fingers clumsy with terror and anticipation, and now as she walked the mile toward the castle, every step felt like a small death and rebirth. The crimson silk whispered against her legs with each movement, a constant reminder that she was draped in something worth more than 100 lives like hers. The ermine lining brushed her neck, soft as a lover's touch, obscene in its luxury against skin that had known nothing but rough wool for years. She had wrapped her hair in a style she remembered from her youth, simple but elegant, the kind a minor noblewoman might wear. Her face, scrubbed clean and sharpened by hunger into something almost regal, would have to be disguise enough. No jewels, no elaborate cosmetics, just the mantle, magnificent and unmistakable, and the terrible audacity of wearing it. The castle blazed with light as she approached, every window golden, music drifting through the summer air like honey. Carriages lined the approach, disgorging nobles in their finery, women in silk gowns, men in velvet doublets, everyone dripping with wealth and confidence. Elara joined the flow of guests, keeping the hood of the mantle raised to shadow her face, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst through her ribs. A guard at the entrance glanced at her, his eyes catching on the crimson silk, and for a moment she thought she saw recognition flicker across his face. But then another guest jostled past, complaining loudly about the wait, and the guard's attention shifted. Elara slipped through the doors on trembling legs, the stolen invitation clutched in her sweating palm, never actually needing to present it. The mantle itself was invitation enough. No guard wanted to insult someone important by demanding proof of status. Inside, the castle was a fever dream of opulence. Tapestries hung from stone walls, their threads catching candlelight and throwing back images of ancient battles and royal hunts. The floor was polished marble, so clean Elara could see distorted reflections of the guests moving across its surface like ghosts. Servants in crisp livery carried trays of wine and delicacies, roasted pheasant, honeyed figs, pastries dusted with sugar that sparkled like snow. Elara's stomach cramped, with hunger so intense it felt like violence. She had not eaten in 2 days, saving her energy, and now the smell of food made her dizzy. A servant offered her a glass of wine, and she took it with shaking hands, sipping slowly to give herself something to do, some reason to stand still while her eyes mapped the space and her mind screamed at her to run. The ballroom opened before her like the mouth of some golden beast. Chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, each one holding dozens of candles that cast dancing light across the assembled crowd. There must have been 200 people, maybe more, all of them laughing and talking and performing the elaborate dance of court politics. Musicians played in one corner, their melody weaving through conversation like a thread through fabric. And at the far end of the room, elevated on a dais, sat King Edmund on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of oak and gilded until it hurt to look at directly. He wore blue velvet trimmed with gold, a crown on his head, and an expression of polite boredom that made Alara's hands clench into fists. This was the man she had saved. This comfortable, distant king who looked like he had never known fear or hunger or the weight of debts unpaid. She lowered her hood slowly, letting the mantle fall back to reveal her face in the full glory of the garment. The effect was not immediate. A few nearby guests glanced at her with mild curiosity, then away. But then a woman in green silk gasped, her wineglass freezing halfway to her lips. Her companion followed her stare and went pale. Within seconds, a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Whispers began, spreading outward in waves. The Queen's mantle. How is she wearing the Queen's mantle? That is the coronation mantle. It is supposed to be locked away. Who is she? The music stuttered and died. Conversations fractured into shocked silence. And slowly, inevitably, every eye in the room turned toward Alara, standing just inside the ballroom entrance, draped in dead Isolde's most sacred garment. The silence was so complete Alara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She forced herself to breathe, to stand straight, to meet the stares without flinching, even though every instinct screamed at her to collapse or flee. On the dais, King Edmund had risen from his throne. His face was a mask of confusion and something that might have been anger, though it was hard to tell from this distance. He descended the steps slowly, the crowd parting before him like water, until he stood in the center of the ballroom floor, staring at Alara with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Who are you?" His voice carried across the silent room, sharp as a blade. "And how dare you wear that mantle?" The advisors flanking him looked murderous. An elderly man with calculating eyes, a younger courtier with his hand on his sword, both of them radiating barely, contained rage. These were the men who had hidden the truth, who had built Edmund's false history, and now their lies were standing in the center of their carefully controlled world, wearing evidence of their deception. Alara's voice, when it came, was stronger than she expected. "I am Alara of Thornfield, Your Majesty, and I wear this mantle because your late queen left it to me before she died, because she believed I was owed a debt, and she sought to repay it on your behalf since you could not. Remember owing it yourself." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Edmund raised his hand and silence fell again immediately. His eyes never left her face. "I have never met you before in my life," he said, each word precise and cold. "You are a thief. Guards, arrest this woman and retrieve the Queen's property." 4 guards moved toward her, their hands on their weapons, and Alara felt time compress into a single pinpoint of desperate clarity. This was the moment. Now or never. She reached into the folds of the mantle and pulled out the falcon pin, holding it high where everyone could see the rubies catching candlelight. "Do you recognize this, Your Majesty?" Edmund's steps faltered, his eyes fixed on the pin, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, perhaps, or the ghost of recognition struggling against the walls his damaged mind had built. "That pin is from the royal treasury," the elderly advisor said quickly, stepping forward. "More evidence of her theft, Your Majesty. She must have stolen it along with the mantle." But Alara was watching Edmund's face, watching the way his eyes traced the falcon's wings, the way his breathing had changed. "This pin has been in my possession for 23 years, she said, her voice ringing through the ballroom. "You gave it to me the night I saved your life. You were not a king then. You were a bleeding, terrified young man who stumbled into my cottage after being attacked by bandits on the road from the eastern hunting lodge. You had been traveling in disguise, and no one knew where you were. If I had not hidden you, if I had not lied to the soldiers who came searching, you would have died on my floor." The king's face had gone white as bone. His hand moved unconsciously to his temple, pressing there as if fighting a headache. "I remember no such thing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I was never at any eastern hunting lodge." The elderly advisor's expression was carefully blank, but Alara saw his jaw tighten. "Your Majesty had an accident around that time," the advisor said smoothly. "A fall from your horse. You were unconscious for some time. When you woke, there were some gaps in your memory. This woman has clearly heard rumors of that incident and is using them to fabricate a connection to you." But Alara was not listening to the advisor. She was watching Edmund, watching the way his fingers pressed harder against his temple, the way pain was creeping into his eyes. "You told me something that night," she said, her voice softer now, meant only for him, even though the whole room was listening. "Something you said no one else knew. Something you had not spoken aloud in years." Edmund's breathing was shallow now. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. "What did I supposedly tell you?" The question came out rough, almost desperate. Alara took a step forward, and the guards tensed, but Edmund waved them back with a sharp gesture. She was close enough now to see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Close enough to see that underneath the crown and velvet, he was still human, still capable of being hurt. "You told me your real name," she whispered, and the room held its collective breath. "Not Edmund. That was your coronation name, chosen by advisors and priests. You told me the name your mother called you before she died. The name you had not heard, spoken since you were a child." The king's face was a battlefield of emotion, fear, confusion, anger, and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "How could you possibly know?" he started, but the words died as his eyes locked on hers, and in that moment, Alara saw it. A flicker, a crack in the wall. Something ancient and buried struggling toward light. "Tell me," he breathed, and the elderly advisor stepped forward sharply, but Edmund held up his hand without looking away from Alara. "Tell me the name. If you truly know it, if this is not some elaborate deception, then tell me what my mother called me." Ilara's whole body was shaking. This was it, the moment everything balanced on. She opened her mouth to speak the name, and a woman's scream tore through the ballroom. One of the noble women had fainted, her body crumpling to the floor in a rustle of silk, and in the chaos of people rushing to help her, the elderly advisor leaned close to Edmund and whispered something urgent in his ear. The king's expression shuddered immediately, the moment of vulnerability vanishing behind royal composure. When he looked at Alara again, his eyes were hard. "Enough of this circus," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "You have disrupted my celebration, stolen sacred objects, and made wild accusations. The name you claim to know is a test you will fail, because you cannot possibly know it. Guards, take her to the dungeons. We will sort through her lies in the morning." The guards, closed in, and Alara felt hands grip her arms. Her last sight before they dragged her from the ballroom was Edmund's face, pale and haunted, his hand still pressed to his temple as if trying to hold his fractured mind together. She had been so close, so desperately close. And now the door was slamming shut again, and she was being pulled into darkness, the name still unspoken on her tongue. The dungeon cell smelled of mildew and human despair, a scent Alara recognized from her years on the streets, but had never experienced from this side of iron bars. They had stripped the mantle from her shoulders with rough hands that left bruises, the crimson silk disappearing into the darkness as guards carried it away like evidence of a crime, which she supposed it was. Theft of royal property, impersonating nobility. disrupting the king's peace. The charges would be enough to hang her 3 times over. She sat on the cold stone floor with her back against the wall, her body shaking with something beyond fear, a kind of exhausted disbelief that she had come so close to breaking through only to have it snatched away at the final moment. The woman who fainted. The advisor's whispered words. Edmund's face shuddering closed like a door slamming. All of it choreographed, she realized now. All of it designed to stop her from speaking that name aloud. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her cell, and Alara looked up to see not a guard but the elderly advisor who had stood at e'ing. Edmund sighed. He carried no torch, navigating the darkness with the confidence of someone who had walked these passages many times before. His face, illuminated by the single guttering candle in the hallway, was carved from stone and malice. "You are a clever woman," he said, his voice soft and absolutely devoid of warmth. "Cleverer than we anticipated. The queen was clever too. It got her killed." Ilara's blood turned to ice. "You murdered her." It was not a question. The advisor's smile was thin as a blade. "Fever is such a convenient illness. Quick, efficient, leaves no questions, especially when the victim has been caring for sick peasants in the lower districts. Who could question that she caught something unfortunate?" He stepped closer to the bars, and Alara could see his eyes now. Cold, calculating, absolutely certain of his own righteousness. "She came to us after speaking with you, demanded we tell the king the truth about his injury, about the gaps in his memory. Threatened to expose us if we did not." His fingers drummed against the iron bars. "We explained to her, as I will now explain to you, that the truth would destroy him. Edmund's mind is fractured. The injury he sustained that night did not just erase memories, it left him vulnerable to headaches, to confusion, to episodes where he loses time entirely if pushed too hard. We have spent 23 years carefully managing his condition, building him a stable identity, protecting him from the chaos of his own broken mind. What you call lies, we call mercy." Ilara's hands clenched in her lap. "You built him a prison and called it protection. You stole his right to know his own history." The advisor's expression did not change. "We gave him a kingdom. We gave him purpose and stability, and the ability to rule effectively despite his injury. Yes, we hid the truth. Yes, we filled gaps with convenient stories. But the alternative was a king who could not trust his own memories, who would be paralyzed by doubt, who would be seen as weak by every enemy of the crown. We saved the kingdom along with the man. If that required small sacrifices like your suffering or the queen's life, then so be it." The casual way he spoke of murder made Alara's stomach turn. "And now you will kill me too." The advisor shook his head slowly. "That depends entirely on you. If you insist on speaking the name you claim to know, if you continue to destabilize the king's carefully maintained equilibrium, then yes, you will die. Quietly. Another unfortunate fever. Another sad story no one will remember." He pulled something from his robe, the falcon pin gleaming in the candlelight. "This is remarkable craftsmanship. The mechanism inside is particularly clever. The queen showed it to us before we were forced to act. Hair, blood, fabric, all very convincing. All completely inadmissible as evidence because you are a thief and a liar, and no court would take your word over ours." He turned the pin over in his fingers with detached appreciation. "But I am a reasonable man. I understand you have suffered. I understand you believe you are owed something. So I will make you an offer. Confess that you stole the mantle and pin from the royal treasury. Sign a document admitting your guilt. Accept punishment. Let us say 5 years of service in the castle kitchens, enough to satisfy public justice without actually harming you. In exchange, we will ensure you are fed, housed, and kept alive. You will never speak to the king. You will never tell your story, but you will survive. Is that not preferable to the alternative?" Ilara stared at him. This man who had murdered a queen and was now offering her scraps from the table like she should be grateful. "You want me to call myself a liar and a thief to protect your comfortable lies?" The advisor's face hardened. I want you to accept reality. The king will never remember you. His mind is incapable of retrieving what was lost. Even if you scream that name from the rooftops, even if you show him all your so-called proof, the most it will do is give him a headache and make him distrust his own sanity. You cannot win this. The only choice you have is how you lose. Quietly and alive, or loudly and dead. He placed the pin on the floor outside her cell, just out of reach. I will return in 1 hour for your answer. Think carefully. The queen thought she could change things too. Her grave is very quiet now. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Alara alone with the pin glinting mockingly beyond the bars and the weight of his words pressing on her chest like a stone. She could survive. She could eat regular meals, sleep under a roof, live to old age scrubbing pots in the castle kitchens while the man she saved walked above her head, never knowing, never remembering. It was more than she had now, more than the streets had offered. A small, mean life, but a life nonetheless. And what was the alternative? Die for a truth that would never be believed. Die so the king could have a headache and the advisors could spin her death into more convenient lies? What would her children think of that choice? Would they want her to survive? Or would they want her to fight even if fighting meant death? Alara closed her eyes and saw Mara's face. Her daughter at 7 years old, before the fever took her, asking why some people lived in castles and others slept in the cold. Because the world is not fair, sweet one, Alara had told her. Because sometimes bad things happen to good people and no one fixes it. Mara had frowned, her small face serious. Then we should fix it, Mama. Even if it is hard. Even if no one helps us. We should fix it anyway. The memory made Alara's throat close. She pressed her hands against her face and felt hot tears slip between her fingers. She had told her daughter to accept injustice because fighting it seemed impossible. And now she had the chance to prove that lesson wrong, even if it cost her everything. A sound in the corridor made her look up, not the advisor's confident footsteps, but something softer, more hesitant. A figure appeared in the shadows, young, dressed in servant's clothing, carrying a small oil lamp. As the light reached Alara's cell, she recognized the face. One of the kitchen girls who sometimes brought food to prisoners. The girl looked terrified, her hands shaking as she set down the lamp. "I should not be here," she whispered. "If they catch me, I will be whipped. But I heard what that man said to you, about the queen, about how she died." Her eyes were huge in the lamplight. "My sister was one of the queen's ladies in waiting. She said the queen was fine one day and dead 3 days later. She said it did not make sense, that the queen was strong and healthy. She said there were whispers, but no one dared speak them aloud." Alara moved closer to the bars. "Why are you telling me this?" The girl swallowed hard. "Because my sister killed herself 2 months after the queen died. Walked into the river with stones in her pockets. She left a note saying she could not live with what she knew, but she was too afraid to speak it." Tears ran down the girl's cheeks. "I want someone to speak it. I want someone to say out loud that they murdered the queen. Even if it costs everything. Even if no one believes it. Because my sister died keeping their secret and I cannot bear it anymore." She pulled something from her apron, a key. "This opens your cell. The guards change shifts in 20 minutes. There is a servant's passage that leads to the king's private study. He goes there sometimes when he cannot sleep, when the headaches are bad. He is there now. I saw him go in an hour ago, alone. No advisors, no guards, just him." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "They will know you helped me escape. They will punish you." The girl's smile was bitter and brave. "Let them. I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of watching powerful men bury the truth and call it mercy." She slid the key through the bars and Alara caught it with trembling hands. "The study is on the 3rd floor east wing. The passage entrance is behind the wine barrels in the storage cellar. You will have maybe 30 minutes before someone discovers you are gone. Whatever you came here to do, whatever truth you came to speak, go speak it now, while you still can. before they silence you, like they silenced the Queen and my sister and everyone else who dared to know too much. The girl disappeared into the darkness before Ilara could thank her. The lamp left burning on the floor like a small act of defiance. Ilara stared at the key in her palm, feeling the weight of impossible choice settle over her shoulders again. She could stay here, wait for the advisor, accept his deal, and survive. Or she could take this chance, this last desperate throw of the dice, and try one more time to make Edmund remember. Not in front of a ballroom full of witnesses and manipulative advisors, but alone, in the quiet darkness where maybe, just maybe, his fractured mind could find the pieces it had lost. Ilara's hands shook as she fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a soft click that sounded like fate. She picked up the falcon pin from where the advisor had left it, pressed it against her chest, and stepped out of the cell into a freedom that might last only minutes. The servant's passage waited. The king's study waited. And somewhere in the fractured landscape of Edmund's memory, the truth waited too. Whether it would save her or condemn her, she was about to find out. The servant's passage was barely wide enough for Ilara's shoulders, the walls pressing close in the darkness like a throat trying to swallow her. She moved by touch more than sight, her fingers trailing along damp stone, counting turns the way the kitchen girl had whispered. Left at the wine barrels, straight through the narrow corridor, up the spiral stair that servants used to move invisibly through the castle's bones. Her breath came in short, controlled gasps, each one measured to keep panic at bay. Any moment someone would discover her empty cell. Any moment alarms would sound and her brief window of possibility would slam shut forever. The staircase seemed endless, turning and turning, her legs burning with effort after years of malnutrition had stolen her strength. But she climbed, driven by something beyond physical capability, and finally emerged behind a tapestry on the third floor into air that smelled of beeswax and old books. The hallway was deserted, lit by candles burning low in their sconces. Thick carpet muffled her footsteps as she moved toward the east wing, toward the study the girl had described. Every shadow seemed to hide a guard. Every sound made her freeze, certain she had been discovered. But the castle at this hour was quiet, most guests still at the ball below, and she reached the heavy oak door without encountering a single soul. Light showed beneath the doorframe. He was inside, just as the girl had promised. Ilara pressed her palm against the wood, feeling her pulse beat against it, and tried to steady herself for what came next. This was it, the final confrontation. No advisors to interrupt, no crowd to perform for. Just her and Edmund and the truth that stood between them like a chasm. She knocked softly, 3 gentle taps that sounded like thunder in the silent hallway. Enter. Izzo. Voice came through the door, tired and rough. Ilara turned the handle and stepped into a room that was nothing like she expected. No throne, no gilded furniture. Just walls lined with books, a desk covered in papers, and a fire burning low in the hearth. Edmund sat in a chair by the fire with his head in his hands, still wearing his formal clothes, but with his crown discarded on the desk like something that weighed too much to bear. He did not look up immediately, perhaps assuming she was a servant. "I did not call for anything," he said to the floor. "Please leave me alone." Ilara closed the door behind her and turned the lock with a soft click. That sound made him look up, and when he saw her face, he stood so quickly his chair fell backward with a crash. How did you? The guards were supposed to..." His hand moved to his belt where a sword would normally hang, but he was not armed. Just a man in expensive clothes, suddenly confronted with the woman he had ordered imprisoned. "Your advisors offered me a deal," Ilara said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Confess to theft, spend 5 years in your kitchens, stay silent, stay alive." She took a step forward and watched him take an instinctive step back. "I refused, because I did not come here to survive, Your Majesty. I came here to make you remember the truth, even if that truth destroys me." Edmund's face was pale in the firelight, and she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers pressed against his temple in that gesture she had noticed earlier. "The truth," he repeated, his voice strained. "You speak as if your truth is the only one that matters." As if my advisors have not explained to me a dozen times tonight that you are a delusional woman who somehow acquired royal property and built an elaborate fantasy around it. Ilara reached into her bodice and pulled out the falcon pin, holding it up so the firelight caught the rubies. Edmund's eyes locked on it, and she saw his breathing change, becoming shallow and quick. "This pin has been with me for 23 years, she said. "Every day of my poverty, every night of my suffering. I kept it safe because it was proof that once someone saw me as worth remembering, worth protecting, worth keeping a promise to." She pressed the left ruby twice, then the right once, and the mechanism clicked open. Edmund made a small sound, almost involuntary, as the base revealed its contents. "Inside is a lock of your hair from that night, a drop of your blood, a piece of the cloth I used to bind your wounds, marked with the royal crest you wore beneath your disguise." She held the open pin toward him. "Your late queen gathered this evidence before she died. She believed me when no one else would. She died trying to give you back the truth your advisors have stolen." Edmund's hand trembled as he reached for the pin, then stopped halfway, as if afraid to touch it. "My advisors told me you would have some story to explain these objects, that you would claim they prove things they do not prove." But his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes never left the contents of the pin. Ilara took another step closer. "Your advisors murdered your wife because she threatened to tell you the truth about your injury. They have spent 23 years building you a false history to keep you stable and controllable. They call it protection. I call it theft. They stole your right to know your own life." Edmund's face twisted with something between anger and anguish. "Stop," he said hoarsely. "Stop talking. You do not understand what you are asking of me. If what you say is true, if there are gaps in my memory I do not know about, if I cannot trust my own mind." His voice broke. "Do you have any idea what that would mean? To discover that your entire life is built on foundations you cannot remember? That the man you think you are might be a construction created by other people?" "I do know," Ilara said softly, "because I have lived 23 years with the memory of a promise that no one believed. I know what it is to doubt your own reality because everyone around you insists you are wrong. I know what it is to lose everything and have no one witness your loss. So yes, Your Majesty, I know exactly what I am asking. I am asking you to feel for 5 minutes what I have felt for 23 years. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Edmund closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet with tears he did not let fall. "What is it you think I can give you?" he asked, his voice raw. "Even if I believed you, even if everything you say is true, I cannot remember. My mind will not give me back what was lost. So what do you want from me? Acknowledgement of a debt I do not recall? Compensation for suffering I did not knowingly cause? What will satisfy this need for me to remember?" Ilara felt her own tears start to fall, hot against her cold cheeks. "I want you to try," she whispered. "I want you to stop letting other people tell you what is real. I want you to look at me, truly look at me, and search for even the smallest fragment of recognition. Because I remember everything. I remember your face when you stumbled through my door. I remember the sound of your voice when you told me you were afraid of dying alone. I remember the way you held my hand and swore you would never forget me." She was close enough now to see the individual threads in his velvet doublet, close enough to smell wine and fear on his breath. "I remember the name you told me, the one your mother called you before advisors renamed you for their political convenience. And if you let yourself remember, if you push past the walls they have built in your mind, maybe you can remember it too." Edmund's whole body was shaking now. His hand still hovered in the air between them, reaching toward the pin, toward her, toward something he could not quite grasp. "I get headaches," he said, the words coming out, broken and desperate. "When I try to remember certain things, it feels like my skull is splitting open. The physicians say I must not push too hard, that I could damage something permanently if I force memories that do not want to come. So I have learned not to ask questions, not to probe the gaps, not to wonder about the blank spaces in my history. He finally took the pin from her hand, and when his fingers brushed hers, they both flinched at the contact. But sometimes, in dreams, there are fragments. A woman's face I do not recognize, a small cottage, the smell of herbs burning, and a name that sounds like home but vanishes when I wake. Ilara's breath caught. What name? Edmund stared down at the pin in his palm, at the physical evidence of a night he could not remember, and his face crumpled with the effort of trying to reach back through damaged neural pathways to find something that might not exist anymore. I do not know, he whispered. I hear it in my dreams, but I cannot hold on to it. It is like trying to catch smoke. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the same fear she had seen 23 years ago when he lay bleeding on her floor. Tell me the name you claim I told you. Let me hear it spoken aloud, and see if my mind recognizes it, or if you are lying like my advisors insist you must be. This was the moment, the precipice, everything balanced on the edge of this single revelation. Ilara opened her mouth to speak the name that had lived in her memory for 2 decades, the name she had never spoken aloud because it was too precious, too sacred, too much like proof of something no one else believed. But before the syllables could form, the door handle rattled violently. Someone was trying to enter. The elderly advisor's voice came through the wood, sharp with alarm. Your Majesty, open this door immediately. The prisoner has escaped. She may be dangerous. We must ensure your safety. Edmund's eyes locked on Ilara's, and in that moment, she saw him make a choice. He moved between her and the door, his body a shield, his voice ringing out with sudden authority. I am not in danger. Leave us. The advisor's response was urgent, almost panicked. Your Majesty, you do not understand what she is capable of, what lies she may be telling you. Please let us enter and remove her before she does damage. But Edmund's jaw set with determination Ilara had not seen before. I said leave us. That is a command, not a request. Silence from the other side of the door, heavy with unspoken threats and calculations. Then footsteps retreating, but Ilara knew they were not gone. They would be gathering guards, preparing to break down the door, to end this conversation by force since persuasion had failed. Edmund turned back to her, and his face was transformed. No longer the distant king, but someone raw and desperate and terrifyingly alive. We have perhaps 2 minutes before they return with men to drag you away, so tell me. Now, tell me the name before they take this chance from both of us. Tell me who I was before they made me into this. His hands gripped her shoulders, and she could feel him shaking. Please, I need to know if any part of me survived that injury. If there is anything real left underneath all their careful construction. Tell me my name. Garrett. The name left Ilara's lips like a prayer, like a confession, like something too fragile to survive in open air. Your mother called you Garrett. You told me it meant brave with a spear, and that she chose it because you were born during a terrible storm and survived when the midwife thought you would not. You said Edmund was the name they gave you at 12 when you became heir apparent, when advisors decided Garrett was too common, too soft, not regal enough for a future king. But you hated Edmund. You said it felt like wearing someone else's skin. The words tumbled out faster now, 23 years of held silence breaking like a dam. You said the only time you felt like yourself anymore was when you were alone, when no one was watching, when you could whisper your real name and remember who you used to be before the crown started eating you alive. Edmund, Garrett, stood absolutely frozen, his hands still gripping Ilara's shoulders, his face a mask of such intense concentration it looked painful. His eyes had gone distant, looking past her into some internal landscape she could not see, searching through the wreckage of his damaged memory for fragments that might match what she had just spoken. Garrett, he whispered, testing the shape of it in his mouth. And then something happened. His eyes widened, his breath caught, his fingers tightened on her shoulders until it almost hurt. The storm, he said, his voice barely audible. There was a storm. I remember, no, Not remember, but I dream about it sometimes. Thunder so loud it shakes stone. My mother's voice singing something to calm me. But the dream never has. Sound. Just the feeling of being held while the world tries to tear itself apart. His face twisted with effort and pain. How do I know that if it is only a dream? How do I know her voice if she died when I was 5, and my advisors say I am too young to possibly remember her? Alara felt tears streaming down her face. Because some memories live deeper than thought. They live in your body, in your bones. Trauma does not need intact neural pathways to leave its mark. She brought her hands up to, cover his, where they still gripped her shoulders. You told me that night that you barely remembered your mother's face, but you remembered how safe you felt when she held you. You said you had been searching your whole life for that feeling again and never found it. Until that night, when I hid you and held your hand while you bled. You said it was the first time since she died that you had felt truly safe with another person. Garrett's breathing was ragged now, his whole body trembling. I cannot. There is something blocking. When I try to push toward the memory, it is like hitting a wall. But behind the wall, I can feel something. Something real. Something that recognizes what you are saying, even though I cannot see it clearly. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, many of them moving with purpose. They were out of time. Garrett heard it too, and his jaw clenched with decision. He released her shoulders and moved to the door, throwing it open before the guards could break it down. 6 armed men stood in the corridor with the elderly advisor behind them, his face triumphant and cold. Your Majesty, step away from the prisoner, the advisor said with forced calm. She has clearly been filling your head with manipulations designed to destabilize you. Let us remove her, and we can discuss this rationally in the morning. But Garrett did not move aside. He stood in the doorway blocking their entry, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made even the guards hesitate. Lord Cassius, I have questions for you. Questions about my injury 23 years ago, about the gaps in my memory, about decisions that were made regarding my care and recovery that I was apparently never informed about. Lord Cassius's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been fear before the mask of concerned loyalty slid back into place. Your Majesty, we have discussed this before. You had an accident, a fall from your horse. Some minor memory loss resulted, which is not uncommon with head injuries. There is nothing more to it than that. Garrett's laugh was sharp and bitter. Minor memory loss. Is that what we are calling it? Then explain to me why I have no memory whatsoever of the entire month surrounding that accident. Explain why certain questions give me headaches so severe I cannot function. Explain why my late wife on her deathbed begged me to forgive her for not being strong enough to tell me the truth. That last detail made Alara's breath catch. She had not known about that, had not known Isolde's final words. Lord Cassius's face had gone carefully blank. The Queen's final illness brought delirium, Your Majesty. She spoke many things that made no sense. Did she? Garrett's voice was dangerously quiet now. Or did she try to tell me something you had forbidden her to speak? Something you killed her to keep hidden? The accusation hung in the air like a blade. The guards looked at each other. Uncertainly, suddenly aware they might be witnessing something far more significant than a simple prisoner retrieval. Lord Cassius stepped forward, his own voice hardening. Your Majesty, these are serious accusations based on the ravings of a criminal who has clearly disturbed your peace of mind. I must insist. But Garrett cut him off with a gesture. You must insist nothing. I am your king, not your puppet, and I am beginning to wonder how much of my reign has been my own choices versus your careful manipulations. He turned to the guards. Arrest Lord Cassius. Hold him until I have had time to investigate certain matters more thoroughly. The guards did not move, caught between conflicting authorities. Lord Cassius smiled, a thin, cold expression, devoid of warmth. They will not arrest me, Your Majesty, because they know, as everyone in this castle knows, that I am the one who truly keeps this kingdom functioning. You are a figurehead, a symbol, but the actual work of governance, the difficult decisions, The necessary actions, those fall to me and have for 23 years. Without my guidance, you would have been lost in your own damaged mind years ago." The words were designed to wound, and Alara saw them hit their target. Garrett's face went white, then red, emotions warring visibly across his features. "If that is true," he said slowly, "if I am nothing but a puppet you manipulate, then what exactly am I king of? What authority do I possess if every guard in my castle takes orders from you instead of me?" The silence that followed was devastating, because no one answered. Not the guards. Not Lord Cassius. The truth sat heavy in the room, that for 23 years real power had belonged not to the king, but to the advisor who controlled information, who managed his condition, who built reality one careful lie at a time. Alara watched Garrett's face as he absorbed this, watched something inside him break and reform into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. "Get out," he said to Lord Cassius, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying enough force to make the advisor step back. "Get out of my sight before I do something we both regret. We will discuss your future in the morning. For now, leave us." Lord Cassius hesitated, clearly calculating whether to push further or retreat. Finally, he bowed, mockingly shallow, and gestured for the guards to follow him. "As you wish, Your Majesty, but know this. The truth you think you want will destroy you. Your mind is fragile. Push it too hard and you may lose what little stability you have left. Is this woman's validation worth that risk?" The door closed behind them, leaving Garrett and Alara alone again in the study. But everything had changed. The illusion had shattered. Whatever careful balance had governed this castle for 2 decades was breaking down, and both of them could feel it. Garrett moved to his desk and sat heavily, his head in his hands, looking suddenly decades older. "He is right about one thing," he said without looking at her. "My mind is fragile. Sometimes I lose hours. Sometimes I wake up with no memory of what I did the previous day. The headaches can be so severe I vomit and cannot see. If I push too hard to remember, if I tear down the walls they built to keep me functional, I might destroy whatever is left of my sanity." He looked up at her with eyes full of desperate sorrow. "Is the truth really worth that price?" Alara crossed to him slowly, kneeling beside his chair so they were at eye level. "I cannot answer that for you," she said softly. "Only you can decide what your sanity is worth. But I can tell you this. Living with a truth that hurts is different than living with a lie that feels safe. One gives you pain but also reality. The other gives you comfort but costs you your soul." She placed the falcon pin on the desk between them. "The night you told me your name, you also told me something else. You said you were tired of being Edmund. Tired of performing. Tired of being whoever other people needed you to be. You said you just wanted one person in the world who knew who Garrett was, who saw him instead of the crown." She stood, her legs shaking with exhaustion and emotion. "I have been that person for 23 years. I have carried Garrett in my memory when the whole world only saw Edmund. And if you want to keep him buried, if you want to let the advisors keep building their careful lies, I cannot stop you. But know that somewhere in the world, someone remembers who you really were. Someone bears witness. And that will have to be enough." She moved toward the door, assuming this was the end, that he would let her go or call the guards, or simply return to his carefully managed existence. But his voice stopped her before she reached it. "Wait!" The word cracked like breaking ice. She turned to find him standing, holding the falcon pin, staring at it like it might contain answers written too small to read. "That night," he said slowly, "when I was bleeding in your cottage, when I thought I might die, what did I say I was most afraid of?" Ilara's throat closed. She remembered that conversation so clearly it hurt. "You said you were afraid of dying without ever having been truly known. Of leaving the world with everyone thinking you were Edmund, this constructed perfect royal figure, when really you were just Garrett, just a scared boy who wanted his mother and hated the weight of everything expected of him." Garrett's face crumpled. And then, for the first time, She saw tears fall. Real, uncontrolled tears that he did not try to hide or stop. "I still feel that way," he whispered. "Every single day I still feel like I am dying without being known. Like I am disappearing under the weight of this persona they built. And I do not even know if the real me still exists or if they erased him completely." He looked at her with such raw vulnerability it was almost unbearable to witness. "You say you remember Garrett. You say you have carried him all these years. Then tell me, what was he like? Who was I before they broke my mind and rebuilt it? Because I need to know if there is anything worth finding in all this wreckage." Ilara stood at the threshold of the study, caught between the door and the broken man, asking her to reconstruct someone who might no longer exist, and felt the weight of impossible responsibility settle on her shoulders. "Garrett was kind," she said finally, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. Not the performed kindness of royalty giving alms, but the real kind, the kind that costs something. She moved back toward him slowly, each step deliberate. "When you stumbled into my cottage that night, bleeding and terrified, the first thing you did after I barred the door was apologize. You apologized for bringing danger to my home, for putting me at risk. Most men in your position would have demanded help as their right, but you asked as if you had no right to ask at all." Garrett listened with an intensity that was almost painful to witness, drinking in every word like a man dying of thirst. "You noticed things," Ilara continued. "Small things. You saw that my daughter's doll was missing an arm and you promised to send her a new one when you got home. You noticed my husband's cough and asked if we had access to medicine. You were dying and you were worried about us." She sat across from him, close enough now to see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of years pressing down on shoulders that had never been allowed to rest. "But you were also broken even then. You told me you felt like you were disappearing, that every day at court required you to cut away pieces of yourself to fit into the shape they needed you to be. You said you used to have passions. You loved horses and poetry and long walks in the forest where no one could find you. But your advisors said those things were frivolous, unbefitting. So you gave them up one by one until you did not know anymore what brought you joy. You were 23 years old and you had already forgotten how to want things for yourself." Garrett's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "I still do not know how to want things," he whispered. "I wake up every morning and someone hands me a schedule and I perform it. I cannot remember the last time I made a choice that was mine alone." "That night you made a choice," Ilara said, "when the soldiers came looking for you, banging on my door. I could have hidden you in the cellar and claimed ignorance. But you refused. You said you would not let me take the risk alone. You insisted on standing with me, on sharing whatever consequences came. Even though you were wounded and weak, even though staying hidden would have been safer, you stood beside me when I lied to those soldiers. You chose courage over self-preservation." The memory was so vivid she could still feel the fear of that moment, the way Garrett's hand had found hers in the darkness, steadying her while she lied to armed men about whether she had seen their missing prince. "And when they left, when we were alone again and you realized I had just risked execution for a stranger, you wept. You said no one had ever chosen you over their own safety before, that everyone who claimed to care about you only cared about what you represented, the crown, the power, the lineage. But I had just proven I cared about you. Garrett, the person. Not what you could give me or what you symbolized, just you." Garrett stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his back to her. His shoulders shook with silent sobs he was trying to control, decades of repressed emotion finally breaking through the careful walls. "I do not deserve your loyalty," he said hoarsely. "I forgot you. I walked past you at those gates and did not even see you. I kicked you like you were nothing. How can you stand here telling me who I used to be when I became exactly the kind of person I hated? Exactly the kind of king who cares more about appearance than people." Ilara rose and moved to stand behind him, close but not touching. "Because the mind is not the same as the soul. They broke your memory, but they did not break who you fundamentally are. Even with all the damage, even with the manipulation and the lies, you still noticed when Lord Cassius offered me that deal. You still saw it was wrong. Your advisors had 23 years to turn you into a monster and they failed. Underneath all their careful construction, Garrett is still there, wounded, buried, but not dead. He turned to face her, and his eyes held a question he seemed afraid to voice. Finally, he asked it anyway. What do you want from me, now, after everything? If I could give you anything, what would heal what was broken? Alara felt the question like a physical weight. What did she want? Compensation would not bring back her children. An apology would not erase years of suffering. Recognition would not undo the damage. I want you to stop letting them control your truth, she said slowly. I want you to investigate what really happened to your wife. I want you to look into your own medical records and demand honest answers about your condition. I want you to take back the right to know your own history, even if that knowledge is painful. She paused, then added more softly, and I want you to remember that once, when you were young and scared and broken, someone saw you as worth saving. Not because of what you could do for them, but because every life has value, even royal ones, even damaged ones, even yours. The words hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance. Garrett reached out slowly and took her hand, not the desperate grip of earlier, but something gentler, more deliberate. I cannot give you back the years you lost. I cannot resurrect your children or undo your suffering. But I can promise you this. I will find out the truth about as old as death. I will confront my advisors with their lies, and I will make sure you never want for anything again. Alara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I do not want your gold, Garrett. I want your freedom, because as long as you are their puppet, neither of us is truly free. They will kill me the moment you look away, and they will keep you locked in this prison they built from your own damaged memories. She squeezed his hand. So fight, not for me, for yourself. For the boy who loved poetry and horses, for the man who wanted to be known. Fight to take back your own mind, even if the battle breaks you, because living as a comfortable lie is not really living at all. Garrett nodded slowly, and she saw something shift in his expression. A hardening, a resolution forming. Will you stay? He asked. Not in the dungeons, as my guest, my witness. Help me untangle what is real from what they constructed. Help me find Garrett again. The request was impossible. Staying meant risking Lord Cassius's revenge. It meant navigating court politics as a former beggar. It meant living in the castle where her presence would be a constant reminder of Edmund's damaged mind and the advisor's manipulations. But looking at his face, this broken king searching desperately for fragments of himself, Alara found she could not say no. I will stay, she whispered, but not as your subject, as your equal. Someone who remembers who you really are and will not let you forget. Again, Garrett smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face into something younger, lighter. Equal, he agreed. Witness and witnessed, both of us trying to survive the truth. The next morning the castle woke to find guards stationed outside Lord Cassius's chambers and a royal decree announcing an investigation into the late queen's death. Rumors spread like wildfire about the beggar woman who wore the queen's mantle, about the king's night-long meeting with her, about Lord Cassius's arrest. Father Benedict heard the news while preparing morning mass, and he wept with relief, thinking of the kitchen girl's sister who had drowned herself with secrets. The kitchen girl herself served breakfast with her head high, no longer afraid, and in the king's private study, Alara sat across from Garrett while he read through medical records his advisors had hidden for 2 decades, his face growing paler with each page. They documented everything, he said, his voice hollow. Every seizure, every lost day, every time I forgot something important. And then they hid it all and told me I was fine. Alara watched him absorb the magnitude of the betrayal and felt her heart break for him. Now you know, she said gently. Now you have the truth. What will you do with it? Garrett looked up from the records, and in his eyes, she saw grief and fury, and something that might have been liberation. I will survive it, he said. I will learn to live with a mind that does not work the way I wish it did. I will stop pretending to be someone I am not, and I will make sure that every person who helped build this prison of lies answers for what they stole from both of us." He stood and moved to the window, looking out over his kingdom with new eyes. "They wanted me to be Edmund. Perfect, controllable, convenient. But I am Garrett, broken and real and done with performance." He turned back to her with fierce determination. "And if remembering who I am means living with gaps and pain and uncertainty, then so be it. Because you were right. Living as a comfortable lie is not living at all." Outside the study door, advisors plotted and courtiers whispered, and the machinery of power ground forward. But inside, two people who had saved each other across an impossible distance of time and trauma sat together in honest silence, both damaged, both surviving, both finally seen. 3 months later, Lord Cassius was exiled after evidence of Queen Isolda's poisoning was discovered by physicians who examined her preserved organs. The kitchen girl's sister was given a public memorial acknowledging her courage, and Alara stood beside Garrett at the dedication of a new law requiring all royal medical records to be available to the king himself, no matter how uncomfortable the truth they contained. She never returned to the streets, but she never forgot them either, and every time Garrett struggled with his memory, every time the headaches came or the gaps appeared, she was there to remind him that wholeness is not a requirement for worth, that being broken does not mean being less, and that the truest thing about him was not the crown on his head, but the courage it took to keep choosing truth over comfort. They never called it love, but it was something deeper than that. It was witness. It was remembering. It was two people refusing to let each other disappear. And in a world built on lies and performance and convenient fictions, that was the most radical act of all. Sometimes the cruelest betrayal is not being forgotten on purpose, but being erased by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Alara spent 23 years carrying the weight of a broken promise, believing the king had chosen to abandon her when the truth was far more tragic. He physically could not remember the night that changed her life forever, and yet even knowing this, she had to make an impossible choice: accept comfortable survival in silence, or risk everything to speak a truth that might destroy them both. What would you have done? Would you have taken the advisor's deal and lived quietly in the shadows? Or would you have worn that stolen mantle and demanded to be seen, even if being seen meant death? How much is truth worth when the cost is everything you have left? This story reminds us that some battles are not about winning. They are about refusing to disappear. Alara did not get her years back. She did not resurrect her children or erase her suffering. But she got something perhaps more valuable. She became visible again. She forced a king to confront the gaps in his own reality, to question the comfortable lies that had governed his existence, to choose painful truth over safe fiction. And in doing so, she proved that even the most powerless among us have the ability to shatter carefully constructed worlds simply by refusing to stay silent. The question is not whether we have power. It is whether we have the courage to use it when using it might cost us everything. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the promises we make and forget, the people we fail to see, and the courage it takes to demand truth in a world built on convenient lies, then please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. And remember, you are seen. Your story matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let the world forget you existed.